Welcome to Biztech's Asia's hottest startup show, the show that highlights hot startups in the region that have the potential to become unicorns. Today's hot startup is SquareX. SquareX is a browser-native security company geared to empower users and enterprises with its simple browser plugin, which will help protect them from last-mile browser attacks. Now, to tell us more about SquareX, we have Vivek Ramachandran. He's the founder of SquareX. Now, prior to SquareX, Vivek has been successful already. He was the founder and CEO of Pentester Academy. Now, this company trained thousands of customers from government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, and enterprises in over 140 companies. And he successfully sold it to a US-based education and training company called INE in 2021. Now, to tell us more about SquareX, welcome to the show, Vivek.
Thanks so much, Brian, for that kind introduction. I'm super excited, to be on the show. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with you on a bunch of interesting things in cybersecurity and about the company.
Now, for a start, following the success of your last company, what inspired you to start up SquareX?
So Brian, in the last company, what we used to do is primarily, sit with enterprise teams who are defending and, red teams who do internal attack exercises to protect, their network from hackers. And really, this gave me a very nuanced understanding of the different problems that enterprises are having when it comes to how attackers are breaking into them. So one very big insight we got is in the last 4 to 5 years, attackers seem to be focusing a lot on going behind enterprise users while they are online. So if you think about it, almost all of us spend over 90% of our time today in web browsers, going online, doing our, banking, company work, interactions and whatnot. And we all have heard about phishing attacks and how, attackers are running scams, fooling employees and whatnot. So we figured like this was a very big concern, which is enterprise users were being targeted as they are generally the weakest link in any organization. And that is really where what came to mind is, hey, could we somehow protect these enterprise users when they're online, not just when they're doing their office work, but also when they use the same devices and machines today, in a hybrid work environment to also do their personal work. So we know that, everyone working at a company also has their personal Gmail on all the time. So yeah, so that was the, big insight. And SquareX is really trying to solve that problem.
And so SquareX then, but you have both a consumer product as well as enterprise versions, correct? Tell us about them and what's your go-to-market strategy?
So I think conventional wisdom, around building companies is you either do consumer or you do enterprise, but you never do both, right?
Yes.
And the moment you hear somebody saying like we do both, almost is a very big red flag. It's like, do you do, any of them well? So our real insight for putting out like a freemium version was a little different. What we said was that, look, the purchasing decisions now are happening a lot more intelligently where people want to try things out before they go ahead and buy. At the very same time, Brian, if you think about it, you as an enterprise user, but you as Brian as an individual, both are being targeted today by cyber attacks when you're online. And attackers don't really differentiate between the two, right? Like, they may attack you via your personal Gmail and then try to get to your enterprise resources.
And Vivek, and this is the thing this is a common theme now. Companies are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, but often the point of failure is actually the individual.
Exactly. And truth be told, employees are the weakest link. And I know we've all done security awareness trainings for the last decade where, people have clicked through those screens and chosen the most obvious options, but it hasn't worked. And that is really where our thought process was, hey, give a freemium version which cybersecurity IT people can try, But at the very same time, families can also protect themselves against. And really, the idea was that when cybersecurity and IT people try the free extension, that gives us a bottoms-up GTM motion, which has been working pretty well, where people now come to us saying, hey, I've used your extension individually. What should I do to sign up my entire company? So even
Excellent.
though our focus is enterprise, this was a GTM strategy so that we could get more leads into our funnel.
Okay, how is that different than your competitors? How are you distinguishing yourself in the marketplace? The marketplace is full of cybersecurity companies today because there is a big need in the market.
Correct. That's a very good question. And really what we, position ourselves is solving the missing piece, which is what happens in the browser. I'll give you a very, very simple example. All of us, use endpoint security solutions like antiviruses and whatnot, right? And there are very big enterprise companies like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne who deliver all of this. Now, typically, here is what happens. Let's say, you end up going on LinkedIn, and on LinkedIn, somebody sends you a message basically saying, hey, I want to buy something from your company. Can you fill up this form? Now, the salesperson clicks on the form, goes to a website, fills a convincing looking form, ends up, then getting a downloadable document which contains malware. Now, here is what happens. Endpoint security does the following. If it manages to detect it, it'll say, hey, Brian, looks like you downloaded something online which is malware. Now, when this report goes to an IT person, he's scratching his head, comes to you, and you said, Brian, where do you get this from? And no one remembers or no one wants to admit that they were responsible for downloading something malicious. So attacker source attribution as to how the attack really happened is a very big blind spot for enterprises today with existing security solutions. And so here is what SquareX does. We deploy as a simple browser extension. And the same attack that I just described, Ryan, SquareX can immediately fill the gap and tell the security team that, hey, your salesperson went to LinkedIn, somebody sent him a message over there, which ended up him going to this third-party website from where the malicious document was downloaded. So by telling them the whole source structure of how an attack happened, immediately the admin can go and warn the rest of the team, create security awareness of an ongoing attack. And typically, Brian, most attackers will end up targeting multiple people in the company using the same identical attack, hoping that one or more of those end up succeeding. So SquareX helps detect, mitigate, and threat hunt these attacks happening in the browser against corporate employees in real time.
Now, Vivek, that sounds really like something that, and you can see my eyes because we on Biztech we also do a cybersecurity show. So I have a nuanced understanding of how this is actually playing out in real time in an organization and how useful this is. So tell me, Vivek, then, what's your journey been like since you founded the business? And then, in fact, last year you raised 6 million from Sequoia Capital as well. Give us an idea of your journey so far as an organization.
Yeah. So Brian, once I exited from my previous company, which I sold, I spent like a good 3 to 4 months sitting with a very, very small team and researching and seeing if we could actually solve this problem. So we built a prototype. And with that prototype, I went to Sequoia Capital, who were investors in my previous company as well. And they really enjoyed it. They really immediately saw the potential. I raised the financing last year in May. And since then, we've been firing all cylinders. We have currently around 24 people, most of them based out of Singapore. And we are building the product entirely out of Singapore. So our whole tech team primarily sits here. So there was this whole phase of me hiring a lot of people, making sure that we put out an early version of the product for, as I said, consumers. That has been fantastic, unbelievably. I mean, even for us, it is very, I would say, happily surprising, which is 170,000 people in the last 5 months have actually installed and are using SquareX's free extension today.
And I'm one of them, by the way. I just
Yeah.
did that about an hour, well, less than an hour ago.
Yeah. So welcome to, SquareX formally. And during that time, there have been people who've been coming to us saying, hey, I would love to use this in our organization. So what we did is parallelly, we were building out the enterprise version where we started talking to a couple of very large companies so that, they could be design pilots with us. And we are now going to do a gala launch of the big enterprise version at RSA conference just 2 weeks from now in San Francisco, where we have a booth. We've invited dozens of top CISOs of the biggest companies that you can imagine. And there's been a lot of interest in kind of using our product. So it's been a crazy, crazy journey. I mean, the early startup part is the most fun. And that's how we spent, the whole past year.
Now, Vivek, so you've been a successful entrepreneur, and I want to zoom in on you as an entrepreneur now. You've had a successful exit before, and interestingly enough, pretty much you were working on your SquareX already pretty much as soon as you sold the business. Tell us about what advice and some of the lessons that you've learned from your previous startup that you've actually executed in SquareX.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very good question. I always say that, of course, even with successes, you have a data point of 1 of 1. So, let the viewers take this with a pinch of salt. But one of the big things I've realized is, which is you underestimate what you can do in a year, or rather, sorry, you overestimate what you can do in a year, but underestimate what you can achieve in a decade. And really, the reason I say this is startups are really about compounding value over a long period of time. So one of the most important things that I've learned, and I tell young entrepreneurs, is be patient. Do the hard work, but be patient. It does take time to compound. I think we live in a time where people want immediate gratification. The most we are willing to watch is a 10-second TikTok before we decide if we are entertained or if we should move on. Unfortunately, startups don't work like that. It takes a good amount of time for things to go off the ground. The second big thing I would kind of say is it's all about the team. And I think, of course, when companies succeed, CEOs and founders get a lot of disproportionate, kind of coverage, but it's all about the team. So make sure that the first 20, 25 people that you hire, you really sit down with them, understand their motivations, and you do the right pick. If you do that right, things compound. If you do it wrong, you'll have to keep resetting, the startup's DNA and everything that you're doing. The third thing, Brian, which I've kind of like learned is be international in your approach from day zero. And that is today sitting in Singapore, we aren't trying to be Singapore's best cybersecurity, company. We are trying to be the world's best. And I think just changing that whole perspective on where your competitors are and who are you trying to beat fundamentally changes how you end up building companies. And this is something I've seen a lot of startups do wrong is they feel like they just want to be best in the ecosystem and then see if they can expand. But when they try to expand overseas, the overseas competitors are already bigger, and have a better vantage point of a global market. Last but not the least, what I would kind of say is, I think as a founder, it is very important for you to always be the best example in there for your team, to be in the trenches, not consider yourself to be any form, shape higher than anyone else on the team. And it is always about leading from behind and setting examples. So if there is a massive deadline and your whole team is working, make sure that you are also there and not really just sending those one-off messages on WhatsApp or Slack once in a while. I think people tend to learn, appreciate, respect US founders, people who finally are in the trenches with the team. So, I mean, I would say these are the four, broad things that I've kind of learned over the years.
What would you redo differently if you in your SquareX journey so far? It's a short journey. You've obviously achieved a lot in a short space of time. What would you do differently?
Yeah. So I would say that I would have probably started picking our enterprise design partners a little earlier, even when we were doing the consumer product. And the reason I kind of say that is, when we were doing the consumer one, I felt that we needed, some basic contours of the enterprise product before we could go to organizations and tell them about it. Funnily, what happened is, of course, we built it out and then went, and a lot of these design partners came back and said, hey, this is already amazing. You know what? We could have actually started engaging a lot before. We could have told you a lot of other interesting things that maybe you could have already factored in. So a lot of times what tends to happen is, as early stage startup companies, you always question when is the right time to go to market. And, that was one of the lessons is I felt like we could have gone even maybe 4 months earlier with what we had. And that was good enough to solve a lot of problems many organizations had.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. And what are your goals then for SquareX in the next 2 to 5 years? Where do you see yourself in terms of trajectory?
I think in the next 2 years, I would kind of call it the more short term and 5 years long term. I think in the next 2 years, what I would want to do is make sure that SquareX is acquiring customers in the enterprise space across multiple verticals in a very big way, primarily in markets where competition is high when it comes to cybersecurity, right? Which would mean beginning in America and then, of course, in Asia Pacific. Singapore is actually a reasonably mature market when it comes to cybersecurity, right? A lot of banks, financial institutions, everybody is here. So picking some of these markets, making inroads, building out the entire GTM sales force and all of that. And from there on, I think at the end of 2 years, Brian, I have a very simple test. I look at how the market is changing, which is, are the really bigger players starting to develop something similar? Or, is this market getting crowded? The second, of course, is incumbents, which are other startups, right? Like, how are they executing? Are we still ahead of the curve? And finally, the team's own capability to continue to execute and be one of the best. I feel based upon this is really when we will decide whether it makes sense for us to now raise some ginormous amount and continue to build a very large company, or roughly at that point does it make sense for us to start to partner with other organizations. And in cybersecurity, as companies get acquired at some stage, whether to choose that. So I know most founders would jump in and say all the way to IPO, and I know that is the politically correct answer. My answer is more pragmatic, practical, based upon how well we are doing vis-a-vis the market, and then keep assessing and deciding, whether this is a more long haul or should we join forces with someone.
Vivek, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I wish you all the best in terms of success. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Brian. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that, organizations are facing a massive threat right now from attackers, targeting their employees, especially when they're online. And that is really where, if you've been attacked or you're concerned, feel free to reach out to SquareX. You can reach out to me directly, Vivek at sqrx.com, Vivek at sqrx.com. I'll personally make sure, as a Biztech Asia viewer, that I respond to you and would love to have a conversation on how we can help you solve your problems. That's all from my side. Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah.
On that note, Vivek, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian.
We've been speaking to Vivek Ramachandran. He's the founder of SquareX. And this has been Asia's hottest startup show. I'm Brian Fernandez. Catch this show on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and third-party applications. Thanks a lot for tuning in.